Should the government continue to fund NASA with the taxpayer dollars to the extent that the budget suggests? My brother Aiden, who is a police officer who joined the police force to help people and lay down the law. As of recent, though, the stories he has told me about life on the job tend to involve more homeless people than anything else. On a day-to-day basis, instead of dealing with real crimes and violations, he has to deal with homeless people in San Francisco. They are usually on drugs or suffer from heavy mental disorders. He did not join the police force to take down a new homeless person every day, but that's what he is stuck with. Throughout the past 10 years, the homeless population nationwide has decreased. In 2010, the population was just under 640,000 people, and in 2019, the population was just under 570,000 people. It is still not great, but as a nation, we've come a long way by redirecting money and taking this problem seriously. We have decreased the population significantly, but there is still more work to be done. The government has invested many taxpayer dollars into NASA and their high maintenance operations. The government has also invested an even larger amount of money into military, which dwarfs the budget of NASA. While all this has been going on, the homeless and vulnerable population in the country has dwindled. While the national population has decreased, it has not decreased enough. The question is whether or not we should continue to fund our overpowered military and overfunded military, or let NASA do their groundbreaking research and let the homeless population slowly decrease, or take money from either NASA or the military and fund a larger movement to end homelessness. The research that NASA does contributes heavily to the fight against climate change. NASA is in charge of space and the exploration of space. Ever since we went to the moon, NASA has had a large interest in not only deep space, but a bird's eye view of our own blue marble. The satellites that NASA has orbiting Earth give us a perspective on Earth that we could only dream of. With this view of Earth and the rising issue of global warming, NASA has put their resources to work to find out how we are affected by the climate change. NASA researches The NASA research of our own planet, and not even our solar system or deep space, is beneficial towards the fight against global warming. The International Space Station and several other orbiting satellites have shown images of the Earth with an infrared lens, which has given us a different perspective on things millions of miles away from Earth, like supernovas, gas clouds, and other interstellar phenomena. The infrared pictures of Earth taken from the past decade show the increasing average temperature of Earth, and the last decade was the hottest decade in recorded history. The military has been the second biggest spending spree for our country, coming in behind national security. The government grants the military upwards of $500 billion every fiscal year. The fiscal year budget for 2019 was $686 billion. Last fiscal year, NASA's budget was $21.5 billion, a fraction of the military's. While the military is vital to our country, the research NASA does contribute to the world at large instead of just our country. The fiscal year budget for NASA in 2009 was $10.8 billion, and 3 years later in 2012, it grew to $15.8 billion. The government has started to see a larger need for NASA. Now in the 2019 fiscal year, the Lyndon B. Johnson and John F. Kennedy Space Centers have a combined budget of $19.5 billion. That is more than the 2019 fiscal budget for NASA and only two of the space laboratories alone. While Congress is deciding the fiscal year budgets, they receive letters from the Vatican and bishops that are members of the UCSB, advising them to fund homeless programs and protect the poor and vulnerable in the country. In a letter to Congress, Most Reverend Thomas G. Wensky and Most Reverend Oscar Cantu wrote, We urge you to draw a circle of protection around many programs that serve the poor and vulnerable at people home and abroad. In my opinion, while the government does give NASA a lot of funding, not a dime is wasted. NASA has gotten used to working with their small but slowly growing budget. Government has slowly started to value NASA's global research more and more, instead of the aeronautics innovations for the Air Force. With the growing issue of global warming and climate change, I believe that NASA has become one of the most important divisions of government. From living in San Francisco, I noticed the issue of homelessness as well as anyone does, but I do not believe that money should be taken from government agencies like NASA to form a response to homelessness. In the encyclical Evangelii Gaudium, the Pope states that the current steps towards homelessness are only temporary. In order to completely deal with the homelessness, the government will need to fund large-scale housing projects and programs to educate, feed, and house the homeless. I do not believe that in times of crisis that the money for these operations should be taken from the tool that NASA is in fighting the growing issue. I think that as issues like climate change grow from the human race will start to form a larger sense of community and the need for an overfunded and overpowered government will be less. At the same time, though, the world could fall into conflict over the issue of climate change, which will also call for the need for our overfunded, overpowered military. Should the government pull money from NASA to fund a large-scale response to homelessness? I say no, because while homelessness is a large problem and has been for a while, an even larger problem and more global problem is climate change. I think that the research and data that NASA has to offer should be their response and defense against budget cutters. From a political perspective, this is President Bush's view on the matter 3 years post 9/11. President George W. Bush, on January 2004, how will a country at war and in deficit pay for such things? Since the country was at war, the statement has somewhat of a bias, but this also gives us an idea of the president's view on space exploration. The viewpoint of an average citizen. The average citizen would agree that more money should go to the military over NASA because the military fights to protect us and keep our freedom. At this point in warfare, the U.S. military is such a dominant force that we have been more than peacekeepers in recent wars than actual participants. We contribute to the war by giving the side that has our stance on the matter goods and supplies to fight the war along with support from our troops. Other people think that war is unnecessary and that things that ha- and that war is an unnecessary thing that happens in the world and would say that money should go to social welfare and dealing with the problem on the home front that homelessness is. With this viewpoint, I think this person would rather money be pulled from the military than NASA if they saw the research that NASA has done towards the issue that is climate change. The Church's view. In Evangelii Gaudium, Pope Francis dedicates several chapters to the care for others. Francis states, welfare projects which meet certain urgent needs should be considered merely temporary responses. This should not only be the Pope's view on homelessness issue, but everyone's, while we see these responses as temporary. Until the government pulls money from overfunded assets like the military, there won't be a proper funding for these people. While in a time of war, having a funded military is very important, especially when the cause of the war was a monstrous and terrifying attack as 9/11 was. I still think at this point the government has put so much money into the military that it can easily take some of that money, start more programs and a larger movement on homelessness. Homelessness is one of the biggest daily issues in our country. The fact that the day-to-day lives of some of our citizens is so poor is astonishing. While I agree there should be some sort of long-term response to homelessness, I do not believe that the money for this movement should come from NASA's budget. The government cut such a big check for the military that I'm sure it is put to good use but could be more effective elsewhere in the national budget. NASA has such a small budget that it could potentially set back many operations for them if it was smaller. The money needed to fund this movement on homelessness should come from the military. Some future thoughts. With the homeless population slowly declining, but the issue rising as a topic of argument more and more, what proper steps can the government take to pull money from the right places to fund the right programs with the right leadership? How can the U.S. government learn from the Catholic Church and embody more ideas and care for others toward daily spending of public service towards the poor? And how can we redirect money from the funding of the military to either national or welfare projects? With the Thank you.